In the waning days of 1968, for some reason never very specific and now nearly obscured by time, the prime movers from the Dead Center made arrangements with the Beatles at Apple to send over to London a sampling of psychedeloids, a kind of cultural lend-lease, heads across the water and all that. There were 13 of us in all, hippies, hoopies, and harpies, Hell's Angels and their hogs, a few serious managers with lots of plots and proposals, one prankster without Plan 1. I was happy to be getting out of the U.S. That book about me and my Kool-Aid cronies had just come out, and I felt the hot beam of the spotlight on me. It burned like a big ultraviolet eye. The voltage generated by all this attention scared me a little and titillated me a lot, and I needed a breather from it before I became an addict or a casualty. Stand in this spotlight. Feel this eye pass over you. You never forget it. You are suddenly changed, lifted, singled out, elevated and alone, above any of your old bush league frets of stage fright, nagging scruples, etc. Self-consciousness and irresolution melt in this beam's blast. Grace and power surge in to take their place. Banging speed is the only thing even close. Drowsing protoplasm snaps instantly to Bruce Lee perfection. Enter the dragon. But there's the scaly rub, right? Because if you go around to the other end of that eye and look through at the stars shining there so elevated, you see that this adoring telescope has a crosshair built in it and notches in the barrel filed for luminaries. Kennedy, King, Joplin, Hemingway. Anyway, we headed to London, flying high, as Country Joe put it, all the way. As the DC-8 began to hum down through the thick English fog, everybody realized that after our transatlantic antics, a customs check was almost certainly coming up, and what couldn't be flushed had better be swallowed. Up to the bustling British customs table we floated, a big-eyed baker's dozen from America, in leather and furs and cowboy hats and similar fashionable finery. The weary officer sighed sorely at the sight, then politely searched us for 3 hours, even the cylinders of the 2 Harley-Davidsons. It was well into the afternoon by the time our fleet of taxis headed for London, escorted through the wrong side of the road traffic by Angels Old Bert and Smooth Sam Smathers on their 2 huge choppers. It was a clammy gray twilight by the time we all arrived at Apple. There was a small flock of the faithful at the door, waiting with that radiant patience of reverent pilgrims. Frisco Fran, a long blonde mama of 35, with a feeling for Old Bert and Old Bert's new Harley, and a $6,000 mink coat over her t-shirt and greasy jeans, looked at the little gaggle of fans on the Savile Row steps, then up at the crisp white office building and observed, "I feel like I'm going to see the Pope or something." In the outer lobby, a chubby receptionist welcomed us, with a cheeky wink for the men and an embossed invitation for each of us. She looked like Lulu in To Sir with Love. After a confirming call from higher up, she led us into lobby number 2, where all the rock and roll managers greeted each other, Yanks, Limeys, even a visiting frog, embracing and slapping 5 and jiving each other rock and roll-wise. This got us through Lobby 2's door into the crimson-carpeted keep of Lobby number 3, where George Harrison finally came down to shake everybody's hand and escort us into the very core of the Apple organization. Endless offices, wandering halls with gold records on all the walls, a huge recording studio in the basement that looked like Disney had designed it for Captain Nemo and hired Hugh Hefner to decorate it. Finally, to a doorless doorway upstairs, opening on a large room that we could use as our digs, we were told, during our stay. All eyes popped at the accommodations. The room was full of food. Roasted pigs suckling apples, smoked turkeys, cheeses, breads, cases of champagne and ale stacked to the ceiling. For the big Apple Christmas party coming up, we were told. Old Bert immediately dropped his ratty bedroll to the floor and booted it beneath a table full of glazed goose and stuffing. "Looks like home to me," he proclaimed. Ringo dropped in for Arfamo to welcome us, and once we thought we caught a glimpse of Paul down the hall, though some said it wasn't Paul, that Paul was in New York getting engaged. But he was bright-eyed, lovable, and barefoot, so it might have been Paul. Also, he was small. "They're all so... Spider, a tall ex-UCLA track star gone hip and hairy and 30, searched for the precise word. "Diminutive. They're all the size I thought Ringo was," Smooth Sam added. "I know," said the mama in mink, eyes shining with tender solicitude. "It makes me want to hold an umbrella over them or something." We didn't see John until later, at the famous Apple Christmas debacle. What happened that night has been run down in a bunch of books, both pro-Yank and anti, so no one else needs to go into that. I only want to give you the setting for Lennon's entrance, for drama's sake. As the day drifted toward the festive eve ahead, we drifted out of our little food-filled office to stroll the Christmassy London streets and drink stout in the pubs, work up an appetite for the feast to come, when we ambled back to 3 Savile Row and past the pack of cheeky fans that cluttered the steps with their little autograph books. They all looked like Lulu, and through lobbies number 1 and number 2 to the hallowed lobby number 3, we found that another coterie of Yanks had established a beachhead right in the middle of the lush crimson carpet. What kind of pull they had used to bore this deep into Apple I couldn't imagine, because they were even scruffier than we were. There were a half a dozen big bearded dudes with ragged grins, a bunch of naked, noisy kids, and one woman, a skinny redhead on the sinewy side of 30, sporting a faded blue dress of hillbilly homespun with matching hickey twang. "We're the Fire Dog family," she informed us. "We come here to see the Beatles all the way from Fort Smith, Arkansas. I had this dream me and John was running side by side through the electric blue waters of the Caribbean, and he looked at me and says, 'Come together.' Ticket to Ride was playing. We was naked. We was on acid. We ran right out of the water, right up into the sky, and my given name is Lucy Diamond. Let's chant again, children." The pack of kids stopped fussing and settled themselves obediently in a circle and began chanting, "John and Yoko, Ringo, too, John and Yoko, Ringo, too." The woman snaked across the carpet to the rhythm, all knees and elbows and freckles. "We know they is in the building. One of the kids was running in the hall and seen them carrying a big red sack. This chant will bring us together." Her eyes fluttered shut a moment at the divine prospect. Then she stopped dancing, and she gave us a look faded as her blue dress. "You know, don't you, that the Beatles is the most blessed people on earth? They are. For instance, how many times have you been coming down with the blues and heard a Beatles song come on the radio and thought to yourself, 'God bless the Beatles'? Huh? That's exactly what I said when I saw Yellow Submarine after my last abortion. God bless the Beatles. And how many folks all over the world have done the same thing, more or less, blessed the Beatles? So you see, they're all saints. Blessed saints. I mean, who on this miserable earth, in this day and age, who can you name that has been blessed more times than the Beatles?" We couldn't think of a soul. We were hungry and tired and not very interested in playing Name the Saints. When the door was finally opened to us and we left lobby number 3, the kids were still chanting, "John and Yoko, Ringo, too," and the woman was swaying and the bearded dudes were nodding to the beat. We walked up the hall to our assigned room without a word, stomachs grumbling, only to find the food had been completely removed, nothing left but the smell. It seemed like a hint. Grumpily, old Bert gathered his bedroll from beneath the empty table. "Blessing them's all right, but I guess you don't have to get right up in their faces to do it." "Yeah," Frisco Fran agreed. "Let's cut." Back down in the main sanctum, the night's crowd was gathering. Toffs in worsted flannel and sandalwood cologne, birds in bright beads and bouffants by Vidal-Sassoon, executive types in tie-dyed Nehru shirts and Dayglow tennies, and the champagne was flowing. Old Bert decided a little snack might be nice before leaving. His nose told him the grub couldn't be far away. He sniffed up to a parted door where a natty lad in a plaid waistcoat was positioned as guard. "What say, mate?" Bert had picked up a nice Cockney accent in the afternoon pubs. "That I grabs me a drumstick for the road." "Can't, I don't think," the boy answered, nervous and vague. "Supposed to save it for after. The invited, rather. You understand. For later." "We are invited, old sport." Bert produced the card we'd been issued. "And maybe we ain't staying till later. Furthermore," he jerked a thick-knuckled thumb over his shoulder indicating a place in the past, "I ain't ate since the airport." The guy looked at the thumb with all the carbon and grease still under the thumbnail from reassembling the bikes, and at the leather wristband with its battered studs and the big vein-laced forearm with those terrible tattoos of knives and nooses. And it appeared to me that he was about to see his way clear to advancing old Bert an early taste of turkey. But just then one of the tie-dyed higher-ups sidled by in long mutton chops and a snide smile. He was eating a macaroon. "Don't give it to them, Claiborne," this colorful creature advised through a long bony nose as he chewed his cookie. "I don't care how much chanting they do." Then, very foolishly, he added, "They're nothing but leeches and mumpers anyway." "What was that, mate?" Bert asked through a wide grin, turning slowly from the turkey to what promised to be juicier fare. "What did you say?" "I said leeches and mumpers." Pow! The executive went somersaulting backward all the way to the wall, where he slowly slid down in a pile against the baseboard and lay there, like a rumpled rainbow. The room suddenly polarized, all the Englishmen springing to one side of the carpet to surround their clobbered countrymen in an instant display of British pith, all the Yanks to the other. "Anybody else?" Bert asked the group glaring at us from across the room. "Thinks we're leeches or mumpers?" In a challenge so specific that everybody knew it would have to be answered or none of the home team would ever be able to look the statue of Admiral Nelson in his steely eye again. I took off my watch and put it in my pocket. The music stopped. The two factions tightened and gathered, readying for the rumble. It was into this smoldering scene, right between these two forces about to clash, that John Lennon came in a red Santa Claus suit and a silly white beard. "All right, then," he said. Not loud, but very clear, and reasonable, and unsmiling. That thin, bespectacled face, pale yet intensely bright, polished by more time spent beneath the blast of that high-voltage beam than any face I have ever seen. The thin hands coming out of the white fur cuffs to hold back the two sides of the room, like Moses holding back the waters. That's enough. And it was. The rumble didn't erupt. He stopped it, just like that. Old Bert was so impressed that he apologized at once to everyone, even bent down to help the young executive brush the bloody coconut crumbs out of his mutton chops. Everybody laughed. A cork popped. The music resumed. Yoko emerged from behind John as though cloned from his Yuletide image, in matching beard and red Santa Claus suit, with a big red sack over her shoulder. She began passing out gifts. Blonde Mama Fran decided to take off her mink and stick around a while after all. Spider began to eye the nervous Lulus. The caterers swept in with trays of sliced meats and pickled crab apples. The party went on. Oh-blah-dee. After New Year's Day, I returned to London with my family. We took a flat in Hampstead, and I tubed daily to Apple to work on a spoken word record that was to be called Paperback Records. It never happened. Fell apart. Administrative shakeups. I didn't mind. It was a fun time, hanging around the action in the apple orchard in those days when the bounty was still unblighted. I saw John Lennon every once in a while, after that first night. On the roof watching the sky. In the halls, playing the piano in the studio. At Albert Hall for his overhyped all-chemical wedding, when he crawled into a big bag with Yoko for 40 uncomfortable minutes of public humping, while the packed and petulant house hooted and whistled and called out things like, "How's the revolution going then, John?" But never again saw anything as bright and clear and courageous as when he stepped between the two sides of the Christmas party. He was something. When he said peace, even the warring angels listened. But this isn't a nickel valentine to a dead superstar. What this story is really about is not so much John Lennon as about all the stuff his passing stirred up around our farm. Effluvia both bygone and yet to be, tangible and chimeral, mainly about these 3 visitations I had that week of his death, like the 3 ghosts from A Christmas Carol. The first came the day before the killing, Sunday evening, while we were waiting for my mom and Grandma Whittier to come out for supper. This specter was the easiest to comprehend and deal with. In fact, he was almost classic in his immediate comprehensibility. Versions of this spook have probably been around since the first campfire. He poked his bearded kisser in out of the night, all shaggily a grin. He had a bottle of screw-top Tokay in his right hand, a battered black book in his left, and a glint in his gummy eyes that could have been bottled and displayed in the Bureau of Standards, the definitive panhandler come-on glint. "Greetings the house," he called through a curtain of phlegm. "This is Bible Bill, old Bible Bill. Come in the name of the main Redeemer, praise him. Anybody home?" I didn't give it a second thought. "No," I said. "Dev, Brother Devery, greetings, brother, greetings." He held forth the good book and the bad wine. "Compliments of Bible Bill, these—" "No," I repeated, pushing right on past the offerings. I put one hand on his chest and held the door open with the other, pushing. Behind him I could make out an entourage of shivering teenagers, unhappy in the December wind. Bill wasn't pleased with the prospect of getting shoved back out in it either. "Dev, don't be like this, damn it all, I promise these kids." "No," I pushed. "Give it up, dude," one of the teenagers said to him. "Can't you see you're bugging the man?" "But kin folks—" "But my butt," another kid joined in. "Let's go." With me pushing and them pulling, we moved him back to the Toyota they'd come in, him hollering, "But cousins, brothers, comrades," and me hollering back, "But no, no, no." The second visitation was a little more complex. For one thing, he was likable. He showed up the next morning while I was out in the field with Dobbs, fixing the fence where the cows had broken through during the night. Whenever it's real cold, Ebenezer likes to lead her herd in an assault on the barnyard, hoping to break into the hay sheds, for cussedness and comfort more than food. And it was real cold. The ruts and tracks raised by their midnight raid were still hard as iron. Dobbs and I were long-johned and overalled and leather-gloved and still too cold to be able to effectively hammer in staples. After a half-hour's work, we would have to head up to the house for a gin and tonic to warm us up. After the third try, we haywired a hasty patch and came in for good. I saw him standing by our stove, bent to the open door, moving his hooked hands in and out of the heat the way a man does when they're numbed so stone-hard he's afraid to thaw them back to feeling. I left him alone. I peeled out of my overalls and boots and mixed Dobbs and me a drink. The guy never moved. When Betsy came downstairs, she told me she had let him in because he was obviously about to freeze to death and didn't seem the slightest bit worried about the prospect. "He says he's got something for you." "I'll bet he does," I said, and went over to talk to him. His hand was as hard as it looked, a calloused claw, beginning to turn red with the heat. In fact, he was turning red all over, beginning to glow and grin. He was about 35 or 40, like Bible Bill, with a lot of hard mileage in his eyes and scraggly hair on his face, but his hair was the color of berries on a holly bough, the eyes sharp and green as the leaves. Merry. He said he was called No Lie, John the groupie, and that we had met once 15 years ago at the Trips Festival, where I had given him something. "I got good and turned on," he confided with a big limber-shouldered shrug, "and I guess I never been able to get turned off." I asked him what in the dickens he was doing this far north at Christmas time with nothing on but ventilated sneaks and kneeless jeans and a sunset strip pink pearl button shirt. He grinned and shrugged his carefree shrug again and told me he'd caught a ride with a hippie kid out of L.A. over the grapevine, and the kid said he was headed all the way to Eugene, Oregon. So John the groupie says, "Well, what the hell, never been to Oregon. Ain't that where old man Debaree hangs his hat? Maybe I'll go check him out. Met him once, over a tab or two. Ho, ho. Besides," he added, trying to get that big red claw down a hip pocket, "I got something here I knew you'd want." This made me back off 2 steps. I don't care how carefree his shrug or merry his eye. If there was one thing I had learned in Egypt, it was don't take nothing free, especially from ingratiating types who come on, "My friend, please be accept this wonderful gift, my nation to yours, no charge," pressing into your palm a ratty little scarab carved out of a goat pellet or something, a little hook by which the hustler can attach himself to you. And the less you want the goddamn thing he forces on you, the more attached he becomes. "I got right here," John the groupie announced proudly, holding out a wad of white paper, "Chet Helms's phone number." I told him I had no need for Chet Helms's phone number, that I had never needed Chet Helms's phone number, even during Chet Helms's San Fran family dog promoter days, hadn't even seen Chet Helms in 10 years. John stepped close, becoming intimate. "But I mean, this isn't Chet Helms' answering service, man," he made me realize, delicately holding forth the little chit like it might have been a spindle of the purest Peruvian. "This is Chet Helms' home phone number." "No," I said, holding both hands high and away from the offered morsel, which I wanted about as much as I wanted a goat turd or a hit-off Bible Bill's bottle. "No." John the groupie shrugged and put it on the coffee table. "In case you get eyes for it later," he said. "No." I picked it up and put it in his hand and folded the freckled fingers over it. "No, no, no. And I'll tell you now what I have to offer. I'll give you something to eat, and I'll let you sleep in my cabin, out of sight. Tomorrow, I'll give you a coat and a hat and put you back on I-5 on the southbound side with your thumb out." I fixed him with my sternest scowl. My God, what a thing to do, just showing up at a man's place. No invitation, no sleeping bag, not even any damned socks. It's not courteous. I know it's inhospitable to turn a wayfarer out like this, but God damn it, it's discourteous to be tripping around unprepared this way. He had to agree, smiling. "Well, like I said, I never been able to get turned off the trip. I guess I do get turned out a lot, though. Ho, ho, he." "I don't want to hear about it," I kept on. "All I want you to know is I'm offering warmth and sustenance and a way back to Venice Beach if I don't have to listen to you run any numbers on me. Savvy?" He put the paper back in his pocket. "I savvy like a motherfucker, man. Just point me to this out-of-sight abode." Like I say, likable. Just your basic, stringy, carrot-topped, still down and it still looks like up to me, acid-head flower child gone to seed. Probably no dope he hasn't tried, and what's more, none he wouldn't try again. Still grooving, still tripping. He didn't give a shit if he was barefoot in a blizzard. I left him rolled up in 2 cowhides, thumbing through the latest Wonder Warthog, while the pine flame roared and rattled in the rusty little cabin wood stove like a caged Parsi fire demon. When he wandered back up to the house, it was dark. We had finished supper, and we were on the other side of the room watching Monday Night Football. I didn't turn, but I could see Betsy in the mirror setting him a place. Quiston and Caleb had been duck hunting the day before, and we'd had 2 mallards and a widgeon for supper, stuffed with rice and filberts. A whole mallard and 2 half-eaten carcasses were left. John ate the mallard and picked all 3 carcasses so clean that red ants wouldn't have bothered over the leavings, plus a whole loaf of bread, a pot of rice big enough for a family of Cambodian refugees, and most of a pound of butter. He ate slowly and with bemused determination, not like a glutton eats, but like a coyote, who never knows how long it might be before the next feast, so he better get down all he can hold down. I kept my eyes on the game, not wanting to embarrass him by letting on I was watching. It was the Dolphins against the Patriots, the 4th quarter. It was an important game to both teams as they fought for a playoff berth, and a tense series of downs. Suddenly, Howard Cosell interrupted his colorful commentary and said a funny thing apropos of nothing discernible on the screen. He said, "Yet, however egregious a loss might seem to either side at this point in time, we must never lose sight of the fact that this is only a football game." A very un-Howard Cosell-like thing to say, I thought, and turned up the sound. After a few minutes of silence, Howard announced over the play-action fake unfolding on the field that John Lennon had been shot and killed outside his apartment in New York. I turned to see if John the groupie had heard the news. He had. He was twisted toward me in his seat, his mouth open, the last duck carcass stopped midway between tooth and table. We looked into each other's eyes across the room, and our roles fell away. No more the scowling landowner and the ingratiating tramp. Simply old allies, united in sudden hurt by the news of a mutual hero's death. We could have held each other and wept. The weather broke that night. It rained a while, then cleared. The sun sneaked through the overcast after breakfast, looking a little embarrassed for the short hours it had been getting away with during this solstice time. Betsy bundled John up and gave him a knit cap, and I drove him to the freeway. I let him off near the Cresswell ramp. We shook hands, and I wished him luck. He said not to worry, he'd get a ride easy. Today. I saw somebody stop for him before I had gotten back across the overpass. On the way home, I heard a report on Switchboard, our local community access program, that there was no need to call in to try to scam rides today, that everybody was picking everybody up today. When I got home, the phone was ringing. It was a Unitarian minister from San Francisco who was trying to put together some kind of Lennon memorial in Golden Gate Park. Needed some help. I thought he was calling to ask me to come speak or something, deliver a eulogy. I started saying that, sorry, much as I'd like to, I just couldn't make it. I had fence to fix and kids' Christmas programs to attend and so forth. But he said, oh no, he wasn't wanting that kind of help. What is it you need then? I asked. I need some organizational help, he said. I've never done anything like this before. I need to find out about permits and the like. So I was wondering if you might know how I could get in touch with Chet Helms, that guy who did all those big be-ins. You happen to have Chet Helms' phone number anywhere? Many such memorable scenes from the last decade and a half of our on-reeling epic have been underscored by Beatles music. With a little help from my friends was playing when Frank Dobbs and Houlihan and Buddy helped hold my assified atoms together one awful night. During my 6-month sojourn into the outer reaches of the California penal system, I used a Beatles record as my mantra, a litany to lead me safely through the bardo of being busted. The record was All You Need Is Love. I listened to it so many times that I came to count the number of times the word love is used in the mix. It was 128 times, as I recall. Now, as I run my eyes over these 3 ragged runes of Christmas time in the 80s, looking at them for whatever message or augury they might offer, I cannot help but view them to the accompaniment of Guru Lennon's musical teachings. The lesson learned from Bible Bill and his ilk is simple. I already had it pat. Don't encourage a bum. Tension is like coke to these bottomless wraiths. The more they get, the more they want. The epiphany taught by the visitation of John the Groupie is simple enough on the surface. Don't forget the magical summer of love and the chilly season of Reagan. I think even John the Limey would have agreed with this interpretation. What complicates the lesson is that in its wake washes up the third apparition. This final visitor is still a mystery to me. I knew how to deal with Bible Bill. I know now how I should have dealt with John the Groupie. But I still don't know what to do about my third phantasm, the ghost, I fear, of Christmases to come, Patrick the punk. He was on the road alongside my pasture, shuffling along in army fatigues and jacket and carrying a khaki duffel over his shoulder. I was headed to town to pick up some wiring and exchange a videotape. When I saw him, I knew there was no place he could be headed but mine. I stopped the Merc and rolled down the window. "Mr. Debery?" he said. "Get in," I said. He tossed the duffel in the back and climbed in beside me, heaving an unhappy sigh. "Fucking Christ, it's cold. I didn't think I'd make it. My name is Patrick." "Hi, Pat. How far have you come?" "All the way from New York State on a fucking Trailways bus. Took every nickel I had, but fuck, you know? I mean, I had to split. That East Coast. Shit. All they want to do is fuck you over or suck you dry. I'm dry, Mr. Debery. I'm broke and I'm hungry and I haven't been able to sleep in 3 days from this fucking poison oak." He was only a few years past voting age, with a soft, unblinking stare and a gray mold of first whiskers on his chin. The whole right half of his face was covered with white lotion. "How'd you get the poison oak?" "Running through the woods from this murderous old bitch in Utah or Idaho or someplace." He dug a Camel out of a new pack and stuck it in his swollen mouth. "She thought I was trying to rip off her fucking pickup." "Were you?" He didn't even shrug. "Hey, I was terminally drugged with that fucking bus. Who can sleep with all that starting and stopping? Bums and winos maybe, but not me." I still hadn't resumed driving. I realized I didn't know what to do with him. I didn't like having him in the car with me. He stank of medicine and nicotine and sour, unvented adrenaline, of rage, and I didn't want to let him stroll onto my place. "I came to see you, Mr. Debery," he said without looking at me. He seemed in a kind of shock. The Camel just hung there. "What the hell for? You don't know me." "I've heard you help people. I'm fucked and sucked dry by those vampires, Mr. Debery. You got to help me." I started to drive, away from the farm. "I never read Sometimes a Cuckoo Nest, but I seen the flick. I did read what you said in the Whole Earth catalog about believing in Christian mercy. Myself, I'm an antagnostic, but I believe everybody has a right to believe in mercy, and I need some, Mr. Debery. You can fucking believe that. I'm no wino bum. I'm intelligent. I got talent. I had my own little C&W group and was doing real good for a while. But then, them fucking vampires, I mean, man, you know what they—" "Never mind. I don't want to hear. It'll just depress me. If you promise to spare me your tale of woe, I'll buy you lunch in town.
Lunch isn't what I had in mind, Mr. Devery.
What exactly did you have in mind?
I'm an artist, not a mooch, an experienced singer-songwriter. I need a job with a good little country and western group.
Oh, dear God, I thought, as if I knew a country and western group, or as if any group would want to take on this wave-faced zombie. But I kept quiet and let him ramble on in general about the shitty state of everything, about the fucking psychedelic sellouts, and the nut-cutting feminist harpies, and the brain-crippling shrinks, and the mother-raping bulls who run this black fucking world. It was a week or so after the Lennon killing, a day yet before the winter solstice, so I tried to listen to him without comment. I knew he came as a kind of barometer, a revelation of the nation's darkening spiritual climate. Still, I also knew that, as black as it might be, the victory of the young light could always be expected after the darkest time, that things would get better again, and I told him so. He didn't look at me, but I saw the side of his mouth move to make a smile, or a sneer. The expression was unpleasant, like an oyster lifting a corner of a slimy lip from a cold cigarette. But it was the first that had crossed his puffy puss, and I thought maybe it was a hopeful sign. I was wrong.
Get better? With 70% of the nation voting for a second-rate senile actor who thinks everybody on welfare should be castrated? Hell, I've been on welfare. Food stamps, too. It's the only way a legitimate artist can survive without selling out to the fucking vampires. Fuck Jesus, if you knew the rotten shit I've been through, with that bastard bus driver and that trigger-happy bitch in Idaho, and now this fucking poison oak.
Listen to me, punk, I said, gently, for I figured that anybody who doesn't have anything better to do than travel 4,000 miles to get a fat, old, bald retired writer who he hasn't even read, to get him a job as a singer in a country and western band that doesn't even exist, is in dark straits indeed. So I decided to give him the benefit of some of my stock wisdom. Don't you know you got to change your mind? That the way you're thinking, tomorrow is going to be worse than today, and next week worse than this, and next year worse than that, and your next life, if you get another one, worse than this one, until you're going to simply, finally go out? He leaned back and looked out the window at the passing Oregon puddles.
Mister, I don't give a fuck, he said.
So I gave him $3 and let him off at a Dairy Queen, told him to get something to eat while I did my shopping. For the first time, his eyes met mine. They were pewter gray, curiously large, with lots of white showing all the way around the pupil. To certain Oriental herbalists, the white of the eye showing beneath the pupil means you are what they call sanpaku, a body out of balance and bound for doom. I concluded that Patrick's curious eyes must indicate a kind of ultra sanpaku, something beyond just being doomed.
You're coming back to get me, aren't you?
Something both doomed and dangerous. I don't know, I confessed. I'll have to think about it, and handed him his duffel. As I pushed it out the door at him, I felt something hard and ominous outlined through the canvas. It gave me pause. You think you'll need more than $3? I felt compelled to ask. He had turned and was already walking away. It had felt about the size and shape of an Army 45. But Christ, I couldn't tell. I didn't get much wiring purchased either. Couldn't decide whether to leave him at the Dairy Queen, or call the cops, or what. I kissed off the electrical shop and went on to the video rental to trade in Beatles at Shea Stadium for a new tape. Then I circled back by the Dairy Queen. He was already out on the curb, sitting on his duffel, a white paper bag cradled under his chin, as though to match the chalky swatch on his cheek. "Get in," I said. On the way back to the farm, he started coming on again about the hard-hearted Easterners, how nobody back there would help him, whereas he'd always helped others. "Name one," I challenged.
"What?"
"One of these others you've helped." After some thought, he said,
"There was this little chick in New Jersey, for example, real sharp but out of touch, you know. I got her out of that fucking hypocritical public junior high and turned her onto a true way of living."
Made me mad again. I turned around and drove the little bastard back to the freeway. That evening, when I came back from dropping my daughter off at her basketball practice, there he was, hunching along Nebo Road with his duffel over his shoulder, heading toward the farm. "Get in," I said.
"I wasn't going to your place. I'm just looking for a ditch to sleep in."
"Get in. I'd rather have you where I can keep an eye on you." So he ate supper and went to the cabin. He wouldn't let me build a fire. Heat bothered his rash, and light was starting to hurt his eyes. So I turned out the light and left him lying there. While we were watching our videotape, I couldn't help but imagine him, stretched out down there in the black and cheerless chill, eyes still wide open, not scratching, not even brooding, really, just lying there. The movie we were watching was Alien. The next day, Dobbs and I loaded up the pickup for a dump run to Cresswell and went down to stir Patrick up. "You better bring your bag," I told him. Again, he gave me that, "You too, huh, you fucking vampire" look, then lifted his duffel from the floor and sullenly swung it up to his shoulder. The harsh right-angle object was no longer outlined through the khaki. He was so peeved at being hauled away he barely spoke. He got out while we were at the dump unloading and wouldn't get back in. "Don't you want to ride to the freeway?" I asked.
"I'll walk,"
he said. "Suit yourself," I said, and backed the rig around. He stood in the mud and gravel and Pampers and wine bottles and old magazines, the duffel at his side, and watched us pull away, his round gray eyes unblinking. As I jounced out of the dump, I felt those crosshairs on the back of my neck. The next day he phoned. He was calling from the Goshen truck stop, just down our road. He said his poison oak was worse, and he was considerably disappointed in me, but he was giving me another chance. I hung up on him. And last night, my daughter said she saw him through the window of the school bus, sitting on his duffel bag in the weeds at the corner of Jasper Road and Valley. He said he was eating a carrot and that his whole face was now painted white. I don't know what to do about him. I know he's out there and on the rise. Dobbs and I went carousing this afternoon with old Hunter S. Thompson, who's up to do one of his gonzo gigs at the behest of the U of O School of Journalism. We stopped at the Vets Club to help him get his wheels turning in preparation for his upcoming lecture, his wise man riff, he called it. And we talked of John Lennon and Patrick the Punk and this new legion of dangerous disappointeds. Thompson mused that he didn't understand why it was people like Lennon they seemed to set their sights for, instead of people like him. "I mean, I've pissed off quite a few citizens in my time," the good doctor let us know. "But you've never disappointed them," I told him. "You never promised world peace or universal love, did you?" He admitted he had not. We all admitted it had been quite a while since any of us had heard anybody talk such Pollyanna pie-in-the-sky promises. "Today's wise man," Hunter claimed, "has too much brains to talk himself out on that kind of dead-end limb." "Or not enough balls," Dobbs allowed. We ordered another round and mulled a while on such things, not talking, but I suspected we were all thinking, privately as we sipped our drinks, that maybe it was time to talk a little of that old sky pie once more, for all the danger of dead ends or crosshairs. Else, how are we going to be able to look that little bespectacled Liverpudlian in the eye again when the revolutionary roll is up yonder called?